I woke up at 5:30 in the morning to the sound of my phone buzzing with weather alerts, and when I looked out my bedroom window in Oak Park, Illinois, I saw exactly what I had been dreading. 18 inches of fresh snow blanketing everything in sight, and it was still coming down hard. My name is Erikson, and I had been living in the Meadowbrook Estates development for 3 years, long enough to know that getting snowed in meant missing work, and missing work at the hospital where I worked as a surgical technician meant leaving my team short-handed during what was already a brutal winter flu season. I threw on my thermal layers, grabbed a quick cup of coffee, and headed out to the garage at 5:45, determined to clear my driveway before the 7 o'clock shift started. The cold hit me like a wall when I opened the garage door, the kind of bitter February morning that makes your lungs burn with each breath. My snowblower, a reliable Toro that I had purchased 2 winters ago, roared to life on the second pull, and I felt a small surge of satisfaction as I guided it toward the foot-deep drift blocking my driveway. The machine cut through the snow efficiently, throwing white plumes in a graceful arc onto my front lawn, and I was making good progress when I noticed the porch light flick on at the house directly across the street. That house belonged to Patricia Henderson, the president of the Meadowbrook Estates Homeowners Association, and the single most difficult person I had ever encountered in my 32 years of life. Patricia was 53 years old, always dressed like she was attending a country club luncheon even when she was just checking her mailbox, and she had made it her personal mission to enforce every single rule in the HOA handbook with the enthusiasm of someone who had finally found their calling after years of searching. I had received violations for leaving my garbage cans visible from the street for more than 12 hours, for planting flowers that were not on the approved color palette list, and once for parking my car facing the wrong direction in my own driveway. I tried to ignore the porch light and kept working, clearing the first pass down my driveway as the snow continued to fall. It was 6 o'clock now, and I was maybe halfway done when Patricia's front door opened, and she marched out onto her porch in a pink quilted bathrobe and matching slippers, her arms crossed over her chest like an angry sentinel. "Excuse me," she shouted over the sound of my snowblower, her voice shrill enough to cut through the engine noise. "Excuse me, Lucas." I pretended not to hear her and made another pass, but she was persistent, waving her arms now like she was directing traffic. I finally shut off the machine, and the sudden silence felt almost oppressive in the pre-dawn darkness. "What is it, Patricia?" I asked, trying to keep my voice neutral even though I could feel my frustration building. "You have any idea what time it is?" she demanded, pulling her robe tighter around herself. "It is 6 in the morning, and you are out here making an absolutely ungodly amount of noise." "I can see my watch, Patricia." "I have to get to work, and I cannot get to work if I cannot get out of my driveway," I replied, gesturing at the mountain of snow surrounding us. "In case you have not noticed, we just got hit with a major snowstorm." "I do not care if we got hit with a blizzard," she snapped back. "There are rules in this community, rules that everyone agreed to follow when they purchased their homes. The noise ordinance clearly states that residents cannot engage in disruptive activities before 7 in the morning on weekdays." I felt my jaw clench. "Patricia, I work at Oak Park Memorial Hospital. I am part of the surgical team, and if I do not show up for my shift, actual people who need actual surgery are going to be affected. I think that is more important than your beauty sleep." Her face flushed red, visible even in the dim light from the street lamps. "Your employment situation is not my concern or the HOA's concern. What is our concern is maintaining a peaceful, orderly community where people can sleep without being woken up by inconsiderate neighbors who think the rules do not apply to them. The snow is not going to clear itself, I said, feeling my patience wearing dangerously thin. And the plows have not even come through yet. If I wait until 7, I will be at least 2 hours late, probably more. That sounds like a personal problem, Patricia said with a tight smile that did not reach her eyes. Now, I am going to ask you nicely one more time to cease this activity until 7 o'clock, or I will be forced to take action. What action? I asked, genuinely curious about what she thought she could do about someone clearing snow from their own property. I will call the police and file a noise complaint, she said primly. And you will receive a formal violation from the HOA board, which will include a fine of $250. I stared at her for a long moment, trying to decide if she was actually serious. The look on her face told me she absolutely was. You are going to call the police because I am clearing snow from my driveway so I can get to my job at a hospital. I am going to call the police because you are violating a community ordinance and disturbing the peace, she corrected, as if this was a perfectly reasonable position to take. Now, are you going to stop, or am I making that call? Something in me snapped. Maybe it was the lack of sleep, maybe it was the cold, or maybe it was just 3 years of accumulated frustration with Patricia and her petty tyranny. But I felt a calm settle over me that I recognized as the moment when I had stopped caring about the consequences. You know what, Patricia? Go ahead and call the cops. I will be right here, clearing my driveway because unlike you, I have actual responsibilities that matter to people beyond this little subdivision, I said, and I pulled the starter cord on my snowblower before she could respond. The engine roared back to life, drowning out whatever she was yelling at me, and I went back to work. I watched out of the corner of my eye as she stormed back into her house, and I knew she was actually going to do it. She was actually going to call the police over a snowblower at 6 in the morning. Sure enough, about 15 minutes later, I saw the flash of red and blue lights coming down our street, and an Oak Park Police Department cruiser pulled up to the curb in front of my house. I shut off the snowblower again and waited, my hands still gripping the handles, as a police officer climbed out of the vehicle. He was maybe 40 years old, stocky build, with the kind of face that suggested he had seen too much stupidity in his career to be surprised by anything anymore. Patricia had emerged from her house again, now with a heavy winter coat thrown over her bathrobe, and she hustled over to the officer before he even made it to my driveway. "Officer, thank goodness you are here," she gushed, her voice dripping with fake sweetness. "This man has been operating loud machinery since before 6 o'clock this morning, and he has completely ignored my requests to stop. The noise ordinance in our community clearly prohibits this kind of activity before 7, and I have asked him multiple times to comply." The officer looked from Patricia to me, then at the snow-covered street, then back at Patricia with an expression that suggested he was reconsidering his career choices. "Madam, let me make sure I understand this correctly," he said slowly. "You called 911 to report someone clearing snow from their driveway." "I called to report a noise ordinance violation," Patricia corrected, drawing herself up to her full height of maybe 5'4". "This is a matter of community standards and mutual respect among neighbors." The officer rubbed his face with one gloved hand, and I could see him taking a deep breath before turning to me. "Sir, what time did you start using the snowblower?" "Around 5:45, maybe 5:50, I said honestly. "I have to be at work by 7, and as you can see, we got dumped on pretty hard last night." "Where do you work?" he asked. "Oak Park Memorial Hospital. I am a surgical tech." He nodded slowly, then looked back at Patricia. "Madam, I appreciate you calling, but I need to inform you that the municipal noise ordinance in Oak Park does not go into effect until 7 in the morning on weekdays. This gentleman is not violating any law." Patricia's mouth fell open. "But the HOA rules clearly state, HOA rules are not the same as municipal ordinances, madam," the officer interrupted, his tone still professional but with a slight edge of impatience creeping in. "The HOA can have whatever rules they want, but I enforce actual laws, and there is no law being broken here. In fact, given that this man works at the hospital and we have multiple roads closed due to the storm, I would say clearing his driveway at this hour is pretty reasonable." "So you are saying you are not going to do anything?" Patricia demanded, her voice rising to a pitch that made me wince. "I am saying there is nothing to do because no crime is being committed," the officer said firmly. "My suggestion would be to take this up at your next HOA meeting if you feel strongly about it, but I have actual emergency calls to respond to this morning, and I need to get back to doing my job." Patricia looked like she had been slapped. "This is absolutely unacceptable. I want to speak to your supervisor. I want your badge number. I pay taxes in this community, and I expect the police to respond appropriately when I report violations." The officer's expression hardened. "My name is Officer Dan Morrison, badge number 347, and you are welcome to call the station and file a complaint, madam. But I am going to be very clear with you right now. Calling 911 for non-emergencies is a misuse of emergency services, and if you continue to do so, you could face charges yourself. We have multiple accidents on the roads right now. We have elderly residents who might actually need help, and we have limited resources to respond to actual emergencies. A man clearing his driveway at 6 in the morning so he can get to work at a hospital is not an emergency." He turned to me and nodded. "Sorry to interrupt you, sir. Stay safe out there, roads are pretty bad." "Thanks, officer," I said, genuinely grateful for his common-sense approach. I watched as he got back in his cruiser and carefully pulled away, navigating the snow-covered street. Patricia stood in my driveway for a moment, her face a mask of fury, and I could practically see the steam coming out of her ears. "This is not over," she said in a low, dangerous voice. "You can bet that the HOA board is going to hear about this, and you will be receiving a formal violation notice." "Do whatever you need to do, Patricia," I said, suddenly too tired to care. "I have work to go to." I started the snowblower again before she could respond, and she finally stomped back to her house, slamming the door hard enough that I could hear it over the engine. I finished clearing my driveway by 6:30, took a quick shower, and managed to make it to the hospital only 20 minutes late, which under the circumstances was practically a miracle. I thought that would be the end of it, that Patricia would cool off and realize how ridiculous she had been, but I should have known better. 3 days later, I found a certified letter in my mailbox from the Meadowbrook Estates HOA, informing me that I was being fined $250 for violation of community noise standards, and that I was required to attend the next board meeting to address my pattern of disregard for community rules. I sat in my kitchen reading the letter, feeling my blood pressure rising with each pompous word. Pattern of disregard. I had lived here for 3 years, paid my HOA dues on time every single month, kept my property maintained, and generally kept to myself except when Patricia decided to invent new reasons to harass me. The fact that she was now trying to fine me for the crime of going to work during a snowstorm was beyond absurd. I called my buddy Mark Chen, who was a real estate attorney, and read him the letter over the phone. "Can they actually do this?" I asked. "Can they fine me for something that is not even illegal?" Mark was quiet for a moment. Technically, if the HOA has a noise ordinance in their covenants, conditions, and restrictions document, and you signed that document when you bought the house, then yes, they can fine you for violating it, even if it does not violate municipal law. However, the question becomes whether that provision is actually enforceable. Do you have a copy of your CC and Artiques? I dug through my files and found the massive packet of documents I had signed at closing 3 years ago. I flipped through until I found the section on noise, and I read it out loud to Mark. Residents shall not engage in activities that create excessive noise before 7 in the morning or after 10 at night on weekdays, or before 8 in the morning on weekends. Excessive noise is defined as any sound that can be clearly heard from inside a neighboring residence with windows closed. Okay, so there are 2 things working in your favor here, Mark said, and I could hear him typing on his computer. First, the language is pretty vague. What constitutes excessive noise? A snowblower is loud, sure, but is it excessive in the context of clearing snow after a major storm? That is subjective. Second, and this is the more important point, there is a legal doctrine called reasonableness. Courts generally will not enforce HOA rules that are unreasonable under the circumstances, and I think any judge would say that requiring someone to clear snow from their driveway during a storm so they can get to work at a hospital is pretty damn reasonable. So what should I do? I asked. Go to the meeting, explain your side, and see if cooler heads prevail. If they uphold the fine, you can dispute it, and if they try to put a lien on your property or take you to court, you will have a good defense. Keep all your documentation, including the police report if there is one, Mark advised. There is not a police report because the officer told Patricia I was not doing anything wrong, I pointed out. Even better. See if you can get a statement from that officer confirming that you were not violating any ordinance. That will help your case, Mark said. I thanked him and hung up, then sat there staring at the letter. The meeting was scheduled for the following Thursday at 7 in the evening at the community center, which was basically a glorified shed with a few folding chairs and a podium. I had never been to an HOA board meeting before, had never had any reason to attend, and I was not looking forward to spending my evening off being lectured by Patricia and her cronies. The week dragged by slowly, and I found myself getting increasingly annoyed every time I saw Patricia's house. She had made a point of glaring at me whenever I left for work or came home, and I had noticed she was spending a lot of time talking to other neighbors, probably trying to drum up support for her campaign against my apparently criminal snowblowing activities. Thursday evening arrived cold and clear, and I drove the 2 blocks to the community center rather than walking because I did not trust myself to be civil if Patricia tried to corner me on the sidewalk. The parking lot was more crowded than I expected, and when I walked inside, I was surprised to see at least 20 people already seated in the folding chairs facing the front table where the board members sat. Patricia was center stage, flanked by 2 other board members I recognized but had never actually spoken to. Richard Klein, a retired accountant who was the treasurer, and Susan Walsh, the secretary, who worked from home doing something with insurance. They all looked up when I entered, and Patricia's expression was pure vindication. "Lucas, so glad you could join us," she said with false warmth. "Please take a seat. We will get to your matter shortly." I sat down in the back row, nodding to a few neighbors I recognized. Some of them gave me sympathetic looks, while others avoided eye contact entirely, probably not wanting to risk Patricia's wrath by seeming too friendly with the accused. The meeting started with routine business: financial reports, discussion of landscaping bids for the common areas, debate about whether to repair or replace the subdivision entrance sign. I half listened, checking my phone occasionally until I heard Patricia clear her throat in a meaningful way. "Now we come to the matter of a serious violation by one of our residents," she announced, and the room got quiet. "As you all may be aware, last Monday morning during the snowstorm, Lucas Erikson was operating a gas-powered snowblower before 6 in the morning, creating a tremendous amount of noise and disturbing the peace of our community. When I attempted to address this with him directly, he was rude and dismissive, and he refused to comply with our community standards. Even after I contacted the police, he continued his disruptive behavior. I felt my face getting hot, but I forced myself to stay quiet and let her finish. "This is not the first time Mr. Erikson has shown a disregard for our rules," Patricia continued, really warming to her subject now. "His property has received multiple violations over the past 3 years, and it is clear that he does not respect the standards we have all agreed to maintain. The board has levied a fine of $250 for this violation, and we are considering additional penalties if this pattern continues. Mr. Erikson, would you like to address the board?" I stood up, taking a moment to collect my thoughts. "Yes, I would. First of all, let me provide some context that Patricia conveniently left out. Last Monday morning, we had 18 inches of snow on the ground, and I had to get to work at Oak Park Memorial Hospital by 7. I work in the surgical department, and we had procedures scheduled that required me to be there. I started clearing my driveway around 5:45 with the intention of leaving by 6:30, which would give me just enough time to navigate the roads. I looked around the room, making eye contact with several neighbors. Patricia called the police at around 6, claiming I was violating a noise ordinance. Officer Dan Morrison responded, and he very clearly told Patricia that the municipal noise ordinance does not start until 7 in the morning, meaning I was not breaking any law. He also told Patricia that calling 911 for non-emergencies was a misuse of emergency services. A few people in the audience shifted in their seats, and I saw some surprised expressions. Patricia's face was getting red again. Now, Patricia is correct that the HOA has a noise provision in the CC and RTCS, I continued, but that provision needs to be applied reasonably. Are you telling me that if we have another major snowstorm, everyone in this subdivision has to just stay home from work because they cannot clear their driveways until 7? Are parents supposed to be late taking their kids to school? Are people supposed to miss important appointments because of an arbitrary rule that does not even rise to the level of a municipal ordinance? The rule exists for a reason, Patricia interjected, her voice sharp. We all agreed to these standards when we moved here, and if we start making exceptions, then there is no point in having rules at all. I am not asking for an exception, I said firmly. I am asking for common sense. I was clearing snow from my own property, using a standard piece of equipment for that purpose, during a weather emergency, so I could get to my job where I help save lives. If you think that deserves a $250 fine, then I think this board has seriously lost perspective on what is important. Richard, the treasurer, spoke up for the first time. Did the police officer actually say that you were not violating any ordinance? Yes, he did. He specifically told Patricia that the municipal noise ordinance does not start until 7, and that I was not breaking any law. He also told her to take it up at an HOA meeting rather than calling the police, I confirmed. You have any documentation of this? Richard asked. I pulled out my phone and showed him the incident report number I had looked up on the Oak Park PD website. The call is on record. I can also provide Officer Morrison's contact information if the board wants to verify what he said. Susan, the secretary, was writing notes on a pad in front of her, and she looked troubled. Patricia, did the officer actually tell you that Lucas was not violating any law? Patricia waved her hand dismissively. He said something about the municipal ordinance, but that is irrelevant because we are talking about HOA rules, not city rules. It is not irrelevant, Richard said, frowning. If the police say that what Lucas was doing was legal under municipal law, and he had a legitimate reason for doing it, then I think we need to seriously consider whether our rule is being applied appropriately in this case. We cannot just pick and choose when to enforce our rules, Patricia insisted, her voice getting louder. That sets a dangerous precedent. And fining someone for going to work during a snowstorm sets an even more dangerous precedent, I shot back. What happens next time? Are you going to fine people for starting their cars too early, for scraping ice off their windshields? Where does it end? An older woman I recognized from 3 houses down raised her hand. Can I say something? Patricia looked annoyed but nodded. Yes, Margaret, go ahead. I think Lucas has a point, Margaret said quietly. I remember that morning because I was up early too, worried about the storm. I heard his snowblower, but I did not think anything of it because, well, what else was he supposed to do? We all know how bad the roads get when it snows like that. It seems a bit harsh to fine him for trying to get to work. Thank you, Margaret, another voice called out, and I turned to see Tom Garcia, who lived 2 streets over. I had to clear my driveway that morning too, though I waited until 6:30. But only because I work from home and did not have anywhere to go. If I had needed to get out earlier, I would have done the same thing Lucas did. More people started speaking up, and I realized with some surprise that public opinion was not on Patricia's side. People were talking about their own experiences during the storm, about how difficult it had been to get out, about how they understood the need to clear snow early when you had somewhere important to be. Patricia was looking increasingly flustered, banging a small gavel on the table in front of her. Order, please. Everyone, please. This is not a town hall. This is a board meeting, and the board has the authority to enforce violations as we see fit. Actually, Patricia, I think we need to vote on this, Richard said, his tone making it clear this was not a suggestion. All in favor of upholding the fine against Lucas Erikson, say aye. Patricia immediately said aye, her voice ringing out alone in the room. There was a long, awkward silence as Richard and Susan both sat there without speaking. All opposed, Richard said, and both he and Susan said no in unison. Patricia looked like she had been struck by lightning. You cannot be serious. We have rules for a reason. And we have discretion for a reason, Richard replied calmly. I move that we rescind the fine and add a clarification to our noise policy that exempts reasonable snow removal activities during weather emergencies. Do I have a second? Seconded, Susan said immediately. All in favor. Aye, Susan and Richard said together. Opposed, opposed, Patricia practically shouted. Motion carries 2-1, Richard said, writing something on his notepad. Lucas, the fine is rescinded and we apologize for the inconvenience. We will be updating our policy guidelines to reflect more reasonable standards going forward. I felt a wave of relief wash over me, though I tried not to show it too much. Thank you. I appreciate the board taking the time to consider this reasonably. Patricia was gathering up her papers with sharp, angry movements, her lips pressed together in a thin line. If we are just going to ignore our own rules whenever someone complains, then I do not know why I even bother serving on this board. Patricia, no one is ignoring the rules, Susan said gently. We are just applying them with common sense. which is what we should have been doing all along. The meeting wrapped up shortly after that, and I was stopped by several neighbors on my way out who wanted to congratulate me or share their own horror stories about dealing with Patricia's enforcement tactics. Margaret, the older woman who had spoken up, squeezed my arm as I passed. "Good for you for standing up to her," she said quietly. "Someone needed to, and most of us are too afraid of getting on her bad side." I drove home feeling vindicated but also exhausted from the whole ordeal. I had won this round, but something in Patricia's expression as I left told me this was far from over. People like Patricia did not handle being overruled gracefully, especially not in front of a room full of neighbors. I was right to be concerned. Over the next few weeks, I noticed a distinct uptick in Patricia's attention to my property. I received a violation notice because my house numbers were supposedly the wrong shade of black, according to the approved color chart, though I had not changed them since I moved in. I got another notice because my mailbox was supposedly not perpendicular to the street, off by what Patricia claimed was 3 degrees. Each notice came with threats of fines and demands that I correct the issues immediately. It was harassment, plain and simple, and it was starting to wear on me. I began documenting everything, taking photos and notes, keeping copies of all the violation notices. Mark advised me that I was building a good case for harassment if I needed to take legal action, but I was hoping it would not come to that. Then things escalated in a way I had not anticipated. It was mid-March, the snow finally melting and revealing dead grass and winter debris, and I had spent a Saturday afternoon cleaning up my yard and spreading fresh mulch in the flower beds. I had just finished when I noticed Patricia standing at the edge of my property line with her phone out, clearly taking pictures. "Can I help you with something, Patricia?" I called out, trying to keep my voice level. "Just documenting your landscaping choices," she said coolly. "I notice you are planting red tulip bulbs, which are not on the approved plant list for front yards. Only pink, white, or yellow flowers are permitted in street-facing beds." I looked at the bag of bulbs I had just purchased from the garden center, clearly labeled as a mixed variety that included red. "You have got to be kidding me." "I do not kid about community standards," she replied, still taking pictures. "You will need to remove those and replace them with approved varieties, or face a fine." Something in me snapped again, the same feeling I had experienced during the snowblower incident. I was done playing Patricia's games, done walking on eggshells in my own yard, done with her petty tyranny masquerading as community service. "You know what, Patricia? I am not removing anything. These are tulips, they are beautiful, and they are going to bloom in a few weeks and make my yard look nice. If you want to fine me for that, go ahead and try. I will see you at the next board meeting, and I will have plenty to say about your pattern of harassment." Her eyes narrowed. "Harassment? I am doing my job as HOA president. Your job is not to make my life miserable because I embarrassed you at a board meeting," I said, my voice rising despite my efforts to stay calm. "I have counted 7 violation notices in the past 6 weeks, for things that are either completely made up or so minor that no reasonable person would care. You are abusing your position, and I am done pretending otherwise." Patricia took a step closer, and for a moment I thought she might actually try to physically confront me. "You think you are so special because you work at a hospital, like that gives you the right to do whatever you want. But you are just another resident in this community, and you will follow the rules like everyone else." "Or what?" I challenged. "What are you actually going to do, Patricia? Fine me into submission? Take me to court over tulips? Do you really think that is a good use of anyone's time or money?" She opened her mouth to respond, but before she could, I heard another voice call out from the sidewalk. "Hey, Patricia, while you are documenting violations, you might want to take a look at your own property." I turned to see Tom Garcia walking up, his phone in hand. "I have been doing some documenting of my own, and I have got some really interesting photos of your fence. You know, the one that is actually 6 inches over the property line into the common area. The one that has been there for at least 2 years without any permits or approval from the board." Patricia's face went pale. "I do not know what you are talking about." "Sure you do," Tom said pleasantly. "I had a surveyor come out last week because I was thinking about putting in a new fence myself, and I wanted to make sure I got it right. He noticed your fence right away, said it was definitely encroaching on HOA property. I have got the survey documents if you want to see them." I stared at Tom, then at Patricia, whose expression had gone from angry to panicked in the span of about 5 seconds. "Is that true, Patricia? Have you been violating HOA rules while writing everyone else up for imaginary infractions?" "That fence has been there since before I was on the board," she stammered. "I did not put it there." "But you knew about it," Tom pressed. "You have been president for 4 years now. You mean to tell me you never noticed that your own fence was in the wrong place?" Patricia looked like she wanted to bolt. "I will have it moved." "I think it is a little more complicated than that," Tom said, and now his voice had an edge to it. "Because if you have been knowingly violating HOA rules while enforcing them against everyone else, that is a pretty serious abuse of power. Some might even call it fraud, collecting dues to maintain common areas while you are literally stealing pieces of those common areas for your own property." The word fraud hung in the air like a bomb, and I saw Patricia's hands start to shake. "You cannot prove I knew about it." "Actually, I can," Tom said, pulling up something on his phone. "Because I have emails going back 2 years where other residents complained about property line issues. And you responded to every single one citing the exact section of the CC and Articles about setbacks and property boundaries. So either you are incredibly hypocritical, or you are just hoping no one would notice your own violation." I felt a strange mix of satisfaction and unease watching Patricia squirm. I had wanted her to be held accountable for her harassment, but this was bigger than I had expected. If she had been knowingly violating the rules she enforced on others, that really could be grounds for removal from the board, maybe even legal action. "We should take this to the full board," I said finally. "If what Tom is saying is accurate, then this needs to be addressed officially, not just in someone's front yard." Patricia pulled herself together, drawing up to her full height and trying to reclaim some dignity. "Fine. I welcome a full investigation because there is nothing to investigate. My fence is exactly where it was when I bought the house, and I have never intentionally violated any HOA rule." "Great, then you should not have any problem with us bringing this up at the next meeting," Tom said cheerfully. "When is that, by the way?" 2 weeks from now." Patricia did not answer, just turned on her heel and marched back to her house, leaving Tom and me standing in my yard. I looked at him with newfound respect. "Thanks for that," I said. "Though I have to ask, did you really have your property surveyed or were you bluffing?" Tom grinned. "Oh, it is real. I have been watching Patricia harass people for years, and when she came after you over the snowblower thing, I decided it was time someone looked into her own compliance. Took me about 3 weeks to get the survey done and cross-reference it with the HOA plat maps, but it was worth it. Her fence is definitely encroaching, and based on the age of the wood and the property records, it has been there since before she moved in, but she definitely knew about it." "How can you prove she knew?" I asked. "Because 3 years ago, the HOA hired a company to survey all the common areas for an insurance assessment. That survey noted the encroachment and recommended it be addressed. Patricia was president at the time, and she received the report directly. She just buried it and hoped no one would notice, Tom explained. I whistled low. That is pretty damning. Yeah, it is. And honestly, I probably would not have dug this deep except she has been making everyone miserable with her power trips. Someone needed to check her, Tom said. The next 2 weeks were tense. Word spread quickly through the neighborhood about Patricia's fence situation, and I heard through the grapevine that she had hired her own surveyor to dispute Tom's findings. That surveyor apparently confirmed the encroachment, which only made things worse for her. I also heard that several other residents had come forward with their own documentation of Patricia's selective enforcement of rules, creating a pattern that was hard to ignore. The board meeting was packed, standing room only, with at least 40 residents crammed into the community center. Patricia looked like she had aged 5 years, sitting at the front table with Richard and Susan, both of whom looked deeply uncomfortable. Richard called the meeting to order and got through the basic business as quickly as possible before addressing what everyone was there to see. We have a serious matter to address tonight regarding a property encroachment issue that has come to the board's attention, Richard said, his voice formal. Tom Garcia has brought forward evidence that the fence on the property located at 42 Meadowbrook Lane, currently owned by Patricia Henderson, extends approximately 6 inches onto HOA common property, and that this encroachment has existed for approximately 7 years. He paused, looking at the crowd. More seriously, evidence has been presented that suggests the HOA board, or at least the president, was aware of this encroachment for at least 3 years and failed to take action to remedy it, despite actively enforcing similar property line violations against other residents during that same period. Patricia started to speak, but Richard held up his hand. Patricia, you will have a chance to respond. But first, I want to enter into the record the survey documents, the insurance assessment from 3 years ago, and the email correspondence that Tom has provided. These documents paint a troubling picture of selective enforcement at best, and potentially fraudulent conduct at worst. The room erupted in murmurs, and I saw several people pulling out their phones to text or take notes. This was bigger than a fence. This was about the integrity of the entire HOA system in our community. Patricia finally spoke, her voice much quieter than usual. I did receive that insurance assessment 3 years ago. I will not deny that. But the recommendation was listed as low priority, and with everything else the board was dealing with at the time, it slipped through the cracks. I did not intentionally ignore it to benefit myself. Then, why did you not recuse yourself from enforcement actions involving property lines? Susan asked, and I was surprised by the steel in her voice. You issued violations to 3 different residents over the past 3 years for fence placements, and in each case you cited the exact sections of the CC and Articus that your own fence was violating. How do you explain that? Patricia had no answer, and the silence stretched out painfully. Finally, Richard spoke again. Patricia, I am going to be direct with you. Based on the evidence presented, I do not believe you can continue serving as president of this HOA. The conflict of interest is simply too great, and the perception among residents that rules are being applied unfairly is damaging to the community. I am calling for a vote of no confidence tonight. Patricia's face crumpled, and for a moment I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. Then I remembered all the petty violations, all the harassment, all the stress she had caused not just to me but to dozens of other residents who just wanted to live their lives in peace. You cannot do this, Patricia said, but her voice lacked conviction. You need a majority vote of the full board. Actually, according to our bylaws, a vote of no confidence can be called by any board member and decided by a simple majority vote of residents present at a properly noticed meeting, Richard corrected. This meeting was properly noticed. We have a quorum, and I am now opening the floor for discussion before we vote. What followed was an hour of residents standing up to share their experiences with Patricia's enforcement tactics. The woman who had been fined for having the wrong shade of outdoor cushions. The family who had been written up for their kids' toys being visible from the street. The elderly couple who had been threatened with daily fines because their son's car was parked in their driveway for more than the 48-hour limit, while he helped them recover from medical procedures. Story after story painted a picture of someone who had wielded her small amount of power like a weapon, using the rules not to maintain community standards, but to control and intimidate. I added my own experience with the snowblower and the subsequent harassment, and I saw heads nodding throughout the room. When everyone who wanted to speak had done so, Richard called for the vote. All residents in favor of removing Patricia Henderson as president of the Meadowbrook Estates HOA, please raise your hands. A forest of hands went up. I did not even try to count them, but it was clearly an overwhelming majority. Richard nodded grimly. All opposed. 3 hands went up, including Patricia's own. It was not even close. The motion carries. Patricia, effective immediately, you are removed as president of this board. We will hold elections for a new president at a special meeting next month. In the meantime, as treasurer, I will assume the presidential duties, Richard announced. Patricia stood up, her movements jerky and uncoordinated, like a puppet with tangled strings. This is a witch hunt. You are all going to regret this when this community falls apart without proper leadership. Patricia, please, Susan said softly. Do not make this worse than it already is. But Patricia was not done. She grabbed her papers, shoving them into her bag with shaking hands. You think you are all so smart voting me out. But I have spent 4 years keeping this community up to standards. 4 years dealing with people who want to turn this place into a trashy neighborhood with no rules or respect. And this is the thanks I get. You spent 4 years abusing your authority, Tom called out from the back of the room. There is a difference between enforcing reasonable rules and using those rules to harass people you do not like. Patricia whirled around, her face flushed and furious. I never harassed anyone. I simply expected people to live up to the commitments they made when they moved here. You called the cops on a guy for clearing snow so he could get to work, someone else shouted. That is not about standards, that is about control. The meeting was devolving into chaos, and Richard banged his gavel repeatedly. Everyone, please. Patricia, I think it would be best if you left now. We have other business to conduct. Patricia looked around the room one more time, her expression a mix of rage and something that might have been hurt, and then she stormed out, letting the door slam behind her. The room let out a collective breath. Okay, Richard said, rubbing his temples. Let us take a 10-minute break, and then we will discuss next steps, including what to do about the fence situation and how to repair the relationship between the board and the residents. I stepped outside during the break, needing some fresh air after the intensity of the meeting. Tom joined me, and we stood in the parking lot watching Patricia's car speed away. That was brutal, I said. Yeah, but necessary, Tom replied. She was never going to stop on her own. People like that, they convince themselves they are doing the right thing even when everyone around them can see how toxic they are. What happens now? I asked. Tom shrugged. We elect a new president, hopefully someone with common sense. We update our rules to be more reasonable and more clearly defined, so there is less room for selective enforcement. And we move on, hopefully as a better community. The meeting reconvened, and the rest of the evening was spent discussing reforms. Richard proposed creating a formal appeals process for violations, requiring any fine over $100 to be approved by the full board rather than just the president, and implementing term limits to prevent any one person from accumulating too much power. Every proposal passed unanimously. I drove home that night feeling lighter than I had in months, like a weight I had not fully acknowledged was finally lifted. As I pulled into my driveway, I saw Patricia's house across the street, all the lights off except for one window on the second floor. I wondered what she was thinking, how she was processing everything that had happened. Part of me felt bad for her, but a larger part was just relieved it was over, except it was not over. Not quite. 2 weeks later, I was leaving for work early in the morning when I noticed something strange about my car. All 4 tires were flat, not just low on air but completely deflated, and when I looked closer, I could see small slashes in the sidewalls. Someone had deliberately vandalized my vehicle. I immediately called the police, and a different officer than Morrison arrived to take a report. Officer Jennifer Walsh walked around my car, taking photos and notes, her expression serious. "Any idea who might have done this?" she asked. I hesitated, not wanting to throw accusations without proof, but the timing was pretty damning. "I've been having issues with my HOA president. Well, former president now. She was voted out 2 weeks ago at a board meeting and things got pretty heated." Officer Walsh raised her eyebrows. "Heated how?" I explained the whole situation, from the snowblower incident to the fence encroachment to the vote of no confidence. She listened carefully, taking notes the whole time. "And you think this Patricia Henderson might have done this in retaliation?" she asked. "I do not have proof, but the timing is suspicious," I admitted. "My car was fine when I got home last night around 6. This happened sometime between then and now." "Do you have any security cameras?" she asked. I shook my head, cursing myself for not installing one despite thinking about it multiple times. "No, but some of my neighbors might." Officer Walsh nodded. "I will canvass the street and see if anyone has footage. In the meantime, you will need to file an insurance claim for the tires. This kind of damage usually runs $400–500 to fix." She left to talk to neighbors, and I called my insurance company and then worked to let them know I would be late. I was on hold with a tow truck company when Tom Garcia came jogging over from his house. "Hey man, I just saw the cop cars. What happened?" he asked, then saw my tires. "Holy crap, did someone slash your tires?" "Yeah, sometime last night," I said grimly. Tom's face darkened. "You think it was Patricia? I do not know, but it is a hell of a coincidence if it was not." "Hold on," Tom said, pulling out his phone. "I installed a doorbell camera last year after we had some package thefts. Let me check if it caught anything." He pulled up the app and started scrolling through footage. After a minute, he made a noise of surprise. "Dude, you need to see this." I leaned over to look at his screen. The footage was grainy and the angle was not perfect, but it clearly showed a figure in dark clothing walking up to my car around 2 in the morning. The person looked around nervously, then bent down by each tire. The whole thing took maybe 3 minutes, and then the figure hurried away. "Can you tell who it is?" I asked, though the image was pretty dark. "Not definitively, but look at this," Tom said, zooming in on a frame. The person was passing under a streetlight, and for just a moment you could make out some features. Shoulder-length blonde hair, a distinctive pink winter coat. "That is Patricia's coat," I said, feeling my stomach sink. "I have seen her wear it dozens of times." "We need to show this to the cop," Tom said. We flagged down Officer Walsh, who was coming back from talking to another neighbor. She watched the footage carefully, then asked Tom to email it to her at the station. This is good evidence, but I need to be honest with you. It is not quite clear enough for a definitive identification. However, combined with the context of your dispute and the distinctive clothing, I think we have enough for probable cause to have a conversation with Miss Henderson, she said. I watched from my driveway as Officer Walsh and another officer who had arrived as backup walked across the street to Patricia's house. They knocked several times before Patricia finally answered, still in her bathrobe even though it was almost 8 in the morning. I could not hear what was being said, but I could see Patricia's body language go from confused to defensive to panicked in the span of a few minutes. The officers talked to her for about 10 minutes before Officer Walsh came back over to me. "Mr. Erikson, Miss Henderson has denied being anywhere near your vehicle last night. However, she did confirm that the coat in the video footage is hers, and she has agreed to come down to the station to answer some more questions." "So, what happens now?" I asked. "We will continue investigating. We will pull any other camera footage from the area, see if we can track her movements. The fact that she was wearing such a distinctive coat actually helps us, because it is harder to claim mistaken identity. If we can confirm it was her, she will be charged with criminal mischief and possibly vandalism, depending on the total cost of damage." Officer Walsh explained. Over the next few days, the police investigation unfolded. It turned out that another neighbor 3 houses down also had a camera that caught Patricia walking back to her house at 2:15 in the morning, still wearing that pink coat. When confronted with this additional footage, Patricia initially claimed she had just been out for a walk and could not sleep, but the timeline matched too perfectly with the vandalism. The police found additional evidence when they searched Patricia's garage with a warrant. A utility knife with rubber residue on the blade, consistent with tire material. Patricia finally admitted to slashing my tires, but claimed it was a moment of temporary insanity brought on by the stress of losing her position on the HOA board. She was arrested and charged with criminal mischief in the 3rd degree, which in Illinois is a misdemeanor carrying a potential sentence of up to 1 year in jail and fines up to $2,500. Her lawyer tried to argue for a plea deal with just probation and restitution, but the prosecutor pushed for harsher penalties given that this was clearly premeditated retaliation. The case went before a judge in early May, and I had to testify about the history of the conflict between Patricia and me. It was uncomfortable recounting everything in open court, but I stuck to the facts. The snowblower incident, the harassment via frivolous violations, the vote of no confidence, and finally the tire slashing. Patricia's lawyer tried to paint me as someone who had deliberately provoked his client, but the judge shut that down pretty quickly. "Let me be clear," Judge Rebecca Martinez said, looking over her glasses at Patricia. "Even if Mr. Erikson had deliberately antagonized you, which the evidence does not support, that does not give you the right to vandalize his property in the middle of the night. You are a grown woman, Miss Henderson, not a teenager acting out. You knew exactly what you were doing, and you did it anyway because you were angry about losing power in your homeowners association." Patricia started crying, which might have been genuine emotion or might have been a calculated appeal for sympathy. The judge was not swayed. "I am sentencing you to 6 months in jail, suspended pending completion of 1 year of probation, 100 hours of community service, mandatory anger management counseling, and full restitution to Mr. Erikson for the damage to his vehicle, which I am calculating at $647 based on the repair receipts entered into evidence. You will also write a formal letter of apology to Mr. Erikson and to the Meadowbrook Estates HOA board. Do you understand these terms?" "Yes, Your Honor," Patricia whispered. Furthermore, I am issuing an order of protection prohibiting you from having any contact with Mr. Erikson or coming within 100 feet of his residence, except as necessary to access your own home. If you violate these terms in any way, you will serve the full 6 months in jail. Do I make myself clear? Yes, Your Honor, Patricia said again, looking at the floor. I left the courtroom feeling vindicated but also strangely hollow. I had never wanted any of this, had never wanted to be in a legal battle with my HOA president or testify in criminal court. I had just wanted to clear my driveway and go to work. Life in Meadowbrook Estates slowly returned to normal after that. The HOA held elections in June, and a woman named Jennifer Morris was elected president. Jennifer was a software engineer who worked from home and had a refreshingly pragmatic approach to community management. One of her first acts was to conduct a comprehensive review of all HOA rules, eliminating ones that were overly restrictive or vague, and clarifying the ones that remained. The noise ordinance was updated to explicitly allow snow removal activities during winter weather events, regardless of the time of day. The landscaping rules were loosened to allow any plants that were well maintained and not invasive species. The violation process was reformed to include a warning system and a formal appeals process before any fines could be levied. Patricia's house went up for sale in July, and she moved out quietly one weekend while most of the neighborhood was away. I never saw her again, and I heard through the grapevine that she had moved to a condo in a neighboring town, somewhere without an HOA that she could terrorize. The whole experience left me with a much more cynical view of homeowners associations and the people who run them. I had always thought HOAs served a useful purpose in maintaining property values and community standards, but I had learned firsthand how easily that power could be abused by someone with too much time and a need for control. Tom and I became good friends through the whole ordeal, bonding over our shared experience of standing up to Patricia. We started a neighborhood tradition of monthly informal gatherings at the community center, just a chance for residents to get to know each other and discuss any issues in a casual setting rather than informal board meetings. The gatherings were surprisingly popular, and they went a long way toward rebuilding the sense of community that Patricia's reign had damaged. As for me, I kept working at the hospital, kept maintaining my property to reasonable standards, and kept my red tulips in the front flower bed. They bloomed beautifully that first spring, bright crimson flowers that caught the eye of everyone who walked past. Several neighbors complimented them and asked where I had gotten the bulbs, and I happily shared the information. One morning in early September, almost exactly a year after the snowblower incident that had started everything, I was leaving for work when I noticed a new family moving into Patricia's old house. A young couple with 2 small kids were directing a moving truck, and the husband was struggling to maneuver a couch through the front door. I walked over to introduce myself, and the husband gratefully accepted my offer to help with the heavy lifting. His name was David, his wife was Sarah, and their kids were bouncing around excitedly exploring their new home. "So, how is the neighborhood?" Sarah asked as we took a break from hauling furniture. We heard there was some drama with the HOA, but the realtor was pretty vague about details. I considered how much to tell them, not wanting to scare them off but also wanting to be honest. There was some drama, but it has been resolved. The previous owner of this house was the HOA president, and she had some problems with abusing her authority. She is gone now, and we have new leadership that is much more reasonable. "Good to know," David said, wiping sweat from his forehead. "We were worried about buying in an HOA community, but this place was perfect for our needs." "The HOA is fine now," I assured him. The new president is great, very common sense approach to the rules. As long as you keep your property maintained and are not doing anything crazy, you will be fine. What kind of crazy stuff are we talking about? Sarah asked with a laugh. Well, the old president once tried to fine me for using a snowblower at 6 in the morning during a blizzard, I said. So, you know, that level of crazy. They both stared at me. Seriously, seriously. She called the cops and everything. The officer told her I was not breaking any laws, but she tried to fine me anyway through the HOA, I explained. It was a whole thing, but like I said, that is all behind us now. David shook his head in amazement. Well, thanks for the help and the honesty. And hey, if you ever need to use your snowblower at 6 in the morning again, I promise I will not call the cops. I laughed. I appreciate that. Welcome to the neighborhood. As I drove to work that morning, I reflected on how much had changed in a year. I had gone from someone who just wanted to live quietly and avoid conflict to someone who had stood up for principle and helped reform an entire community. I had learned that sometimes the right thing to do is the hard thing, and that silence in the face of abuse just enables more abuse. I had also learned that seemingly small conflicts, like an argument over a snowblower, can reveal much deeper problems. Patricia's reaction to me clearing my driveway had not really been about noise or rules. It had been about control and power and her inability to accept being questioned. The snowblower was just the catalyst that exposed what was already there. Most importantly, I had learned that community is not just about following rules, but about neighbors looking out for each other and standing together when someone tries to abuse their authority. Tom's willingness to investigate Patricia's fence, Margaret's quiet support at the board meeting, and the dozens of other residents who shared their stories had all been crucial in bringing about change. Would I do it all over again if I had the choice? Honestly, I am not sure. The stress, the court appearances, the constant worry about what Patricia might do next had taken a toll. But looking at the Meadowbrook Estates community now, healthier and more cohesive than it had been in years, I think it was worth it. And every winter morning when snow falls and I need to clear my driveway before work, I think about that February morning when I started my snowblower at 5:45 and accidentally triggered a chain of events that would transform our neighborhood. I think about Officer Morrison's patient explanation of the noise ordinance, Patricia's furious face as she realized the law was not on her side, and the ultimately satisfying conclusion when justice was served. These days, I clear my driveway whenever I need to, secure in the knowledge that I am not violating any laws or any reasonable community standards. Sometimes I see neighbors doing the same, and we wave to each other in that universal gesture of solidarity among people who have to get to work despite the weather. The red tulips come back every spring, a small act of defiance that has become a symbol of standing up for common sense over arbitrary authority. Other neighbors have planted red flowers too, a quiet tribute to the idea that we should be able to make reasonable choices about our own properties without fear of harassment. Patricia's legacy is not the orderly, rule-bound community she tried to create, but rather a neighborhood that learned to question authority and demand accountability from those in power. It is a better legacy than she intended, and certainly better than she deserved. As for me, I am just a guy who wanted to clear his driveway and get to work, who ended up becoming an accidental activist for HOA reform. I never asked for that role, never wanted to be the face of resistance to petty tyranny, but sometimes life pushes you into positions you never anticipated. And you know what? I would grab that snowblower, pull cord, and do it all over again at 6 in the morning if I had to, because some principles are worth fighting for, even if the battle starts with something as mundane as clearing snow from your driveway. The Meadowbrook Estates HOA still exists, still has rules, still collects dues and maintains common areas. But it does so now with a sense of proportion and fairness that had been missing for too long. Jennifer Morris and the Reformed Board have shown that you can maintain standards without becoming tyrants, that you can enforce rules without harassing residents, and that leadership is about service to the community, not power over it. I still live in that same house, still drive past Patricia's old place every day on my way to work, still see those red tulips bloom each spring. And every time I do, I am reminded that standing up for yourself matters, that communities are only as good as the people who speak up when something is wrong, and that sometimes the most important battles are fought not over grand principles, but over the simple right to live your life without unreasonable interference. The snowblower sits in my garage, well-maintained and ready for the next storm. And when that storm comes, whether at 6 in the morning or noon or midnight, I will use it without hesitation, without fear, and without apology. Because that is what it means to live in a free society where laws are applied fairly and reasonably, where power is checked by accountability, and where even a homeowners association president cannot turn a neighborhood into her personal fiefdom. That is the lesson I learned from one February morning and a confrontation over 18 inches of snow. It is a lesson about justice, about community, and about the importance of speaking truth to power, no matter how small or petty that power might seem. It is a lesson I will carry with me for the rest of my life, and one I hope others can learn without having to go through quite as much drama as I did.